Hello friends, Tanya here with another video for Spellbinders, and today we are doing the January 2025 Spellbinders Club Kits, and the theme is Nature's Dance. We're going to start out with the small die of the month, which is the Soaring Dragonfly. There are several ways to do the wings for these dragonflies, and these were die cut with all of the different silver assorted pack metallic cardstocks. They have a radiating pattern on each of the wings, and here I have sorted out each of the layers. So we're going to have concentric colors throughout the wings. And I add a little bit of glue to this base die cut that you can then apply the different paper piercing or piecing elements to create a nice pattern on the wing. I started out with the very tippy tip of this smallest wing, which is the, I think that is the satin silver. And then the next ring is the brushed silver. Then we have the metallic silver, the pearlized silver, and then the glitter silver cardstock. I've done the same pattern for all of the dragonfly wings. And we have the same papers used to die cut the body of our dragonfly. There are 3 pieces of the body of the butterfly. I used the glitter cardstock for the background layer that also has the body, the head, the eyes, all of those components. And then there are layering elements that you can add and make different colors on your dragonfly. You can see that each of the wings will line up with each other, and I'm trying to decide where to attach them to the body. This is kind of a, you can make this whatever you want to make of it. And I am using the grid on my work surface to help me make sure these line up evenly. I add just a little dot of glue on the tip of each of these wings, and I decided to attach them where the different parts of the thorax meet and narrow, kind of like the waist of your dragonfly. Again, using my grid mat to make sure that the wings are symmetrical. I'll put my heavyweight block on top of that so that can dry nicely. There are 2 sprigs of leaves and flowers that you can add to your dragonfly. There's one die that cuts out 6 flowers and then 2 different dies for the leaves, and these are angled in opposite directions. I'm adding the little flowers onto the leaf branches, and you can see that there is a little dot that die cuts out. You also get the word hello in this really pretty scripty font that I die cut with some glitter cardstock, and that is one of the branch of flowers. There is also a die that cuts out the little circle centers. I just didn't use it. Next, we're going to use the Glimmer of the month. It's called Elliptical Weave, and it looks very much like a Celtic knot to me. I, of course, am going to create a full half sheet. That's an odd sentence, isn't it? Full half sheet. I am taking a half sheet of cardstock, and I'm going to glimmer this pattern on the entire piece of cardstock. I've lined it up on one half. Now this will cover an A2 size piece of cardstock, which is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. I'm going to lay this down so it looks like it's going to line back up with the other parts of this pattern. It's not perfect, but it's pretty darn close, and it is not really tough to line it up. We're also using the Aura Glimmer foil. That is the foil that came with my kit this month. And it is one of my favorite glimmer foils. That turned out pretty well. I was pretty happy with that. There are 5 sentiments that come with this glimmer foil, and I've lined them up on my base on a piece of copy paper that is the same size as an A2 size piece of cardstock. Then I laid the foil down, and because I spaced those evenly, I was able to get a second foiling on that same sheet of foil. Next, we're going to use the clear stamp and die of the month. This is called Nature's Path, I think is what it said. And it has all of these beautiful sentiments with a combination of a blocky font and a scripty font. These all coordinate with that theme of flying, like butterflies, dragonflies, and later you're going to see ladybugs. One of the things I like to do when I am creating with the club kits is to do a bunch of prep. And that doubles with showing you all how things play together well. I have stamped all of the sentiments from this stamp and die set, and I used VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink, which is a pigment ink, which works fantastic with heat embossing. I have some clear embossing powder here that I've sprinkled all over that inking. And I do like to stamp like 2 or 3 times to get a good solid inking that will take the embossing powder really well. That is less necessary if your ink pads are nice and juicy, but they only stay that way for a short time. And I just find that repeated stamping works the best for me. I'm here heating the clear embossing powder here so that our sentiments are nice and raised and shiny. I really like how that um, makes your sentiments look so much more impactful. There are coordinating dies for every single one of the sentiments in this stamp set, and I'm just going to die cut them here. I'm using my cute little Scout die cutting machine. I do love having that little die cut machine right on my desk. It makes it really simple to quickly die cut smaller things. And this has a 3.5-inch opening, so it works really well. Here's a quick look at all of those sentiments. And I really think they're going to work well with just about every different uh, portion of the club kits for this month. Next, we're going to use the large die of the month. This one is called Botanical Atrium. It's really beautiful. It has all of these flowers and leaves, some butterflies, and it has that beautiful little atrium that you can be used. You maybe can hear a little voice in the background. That is my 6-year-old granddaughter who's staying with us for a few days. And I did not think she was going to be interested in watching Grandma do her voiceover, but she seems to be fascinated. It's kind of funny. We're assembling the flowers here. This one has a drop-in die that will cut those little fallout pieces, and it has, if you don't use the fallout die, then you can create a backer. That helps to add contrast to those fallout areas. I used some shimmery white or some brushed white cardstock and some brushed black cardstock, along with various colored cardstocks that have been spritzed with distress mica stain sprays in a variety of colors, usually tone on tone. I've got some gold foil cardstock here. This is from the Gold Assortment Treasured Cardstock Pack. And I use that to die cut the flower centers. I've seen some really pretty versions of these flowers where they use contrasting colors of cardstock that are not metallic that look beautiful also. This is a cupped flower that has a large base and then 3 layering petals that you lay right over the center, and they do snug right up against each other. There is no overlap of these petals. It does look really pretty. It's like a cupped flower, partially viewed from the side. There is a stem with a round end a landing spot that you can add your glue. And that stem will work on any of these flowers. This stem has a piece that is specifically for this flower. It will create some little, it's kind of like a little bud, and it has the little calyx on the bottom there, that little extra green bit. And this is for a branch of flowers. There are 2 dies here. There's a die that cuts 2 of the smaller flowers, and then the die that cuts the larger 5-petal flower, or sorry, 6-petal flower, along with that bud flower at the same time. I cut these from more of the brushed white cardstock. There is also a die that cuts these little tiny centers for the flowers. There's one center that's a little larger for the larger of the 6-petal flowers, and then several of the smaller ones. Next, we have a large fluffy petaled flower here. I am going to take the fallout piece from that gold um, fringed center and back this uh, black center that has holes in the center. That way the gold shines through and you don't have to die cut another piece. Then I'm going to layer this fringy gold part over the center. And this is rather like an anemone or a poppy. Very pretty. Next, we have a couple of little butterflies. I cut these from gold and silver glitter cardstock. Next, we have the atrium. There is a large base for this, and it creates a slight outline around the outside of the detailed element of this atrium die. I used a sponge mini ink blender. There we go. With Tattered Rose Distress Oxide ink on it, and we're going to use the coordinating Distress Spritz in Tattered Rose. I shook it up so all of the mica is incorporated in the liquid, and I am just going to spatter from the end of the spray mechanism to add some spattering there. Now it's time to add this atrium, the detailed portion. I die cut this from some pearlized silver cardstock. And I'm just adding little dots of glue with the fine tip bottle on the back of this. You don't have to cover the entire die cut, just some strategic spots, trying to make sure that this will adhere nicely. Now you can add your floral elements before you add the frame, because then it'll look like everything is inside the atrium. This particular element, I am going to add the flowers after I adhere the atrium. Now, because the background piece is a little bigger than the detailed piece, you can use that background element to die cut an aperture for a shaker card, and I'll do that later. And then you can lay the detailed piece over the acetate, and it will create a very pretty background. Next, I'm adding several elements. I think I'm using all of the different floral and foliage elements on the atrium. And I think I even include both of the butterflies. I had carefully planned this out before I started adhering, and I'm just adding little bits of glue, and sometimes I add a couple layers of extra cardstock behind a floral element to help it pop up a little bit over that background. Now this swag of leaves reminds me of sweet pea vines. I don't know if you've ever grown sweet peas in your garden, but they have these little tendrils that attach because they're a climbing vine, and they have these sweet little rounded leaves. The florals here, the small branch of flowers, could look like sweet pea blossoms also. We are in the absolute coldest part of a Minnesota winter, and sweet peas are definitely months from ever happening here. We're going to add a little cardstock behind this red poppy or anemone styled flower. And don't be afraid to trim off the stems of your flowers or leaves, or even some of the leaves, to make them fit the vision you have for your project. We're going to add our cute little butterflies. I've got a silver one here, and this is I think this is the larger of the two butterflies. I'm going to adhere this just with glue in the center of the body. And then I'm going to adhere the gold butterfly, again, smaller, this is the smaller butterfly, adding just glue to the body part, not the wings. And I've bent the wings up a little bit for a little extra added dimension. That is the completed atrium with almost all of the elements. Next, we have the stitching die of the month. This is the Stitched Ladybug. There is a lot of stitching involved here. I've die cut all of the different elements, and I'm going to make some ladybugs that are not the traditional color. And we also have this scalloped stitched frame. There is one die that die cuts the shape. There is another die that cuts out the shape with the piercing, and yet another die that cuts the center so you can create a frame of this. I'm just going to stitch the leaves here, and I did, or sorry, the vine. It's kind of a vine with two thin leaves sticking out. That's how I am envisioning this. I have seen other people stitch this a little differently. Someone created little diamond patterns throughout this edge. You could do all kinds of things. You could do some fancy X's. You could do like a herringbone, all kinds of ways to stitch this. I am not going to show you the entire process because it did take me probably about a half an hour to stitch each of these elements. And I went a little crazy. I think I cut out 5 of these and these oval frames with the stitching holes. And whew, that is a lot. I've got, the first, I don't know, 3 or 4 intersections here, and I'll just show you a close-up of what that's looking like. And there it is completed. It is very pretty. I did also do it with a purple variegated thread, and here are the half circle radiating stitches for your ladybug. Let's assemble this purple ladybug. There is a separate piece for the antenna, and I cut this from some matte silver cardstock, the same as the body. And I'm going to attach that to the body of the ladybug. And then we'll take the stitched head portion, and I'm adding glue just to the stitches because that's what will make contact with the body of the ladybug. We're going to add glue just to the stitching of these wing halves also. And you can apply these in various ways. You can decide how open or closed the wings are on your ladybug. I'm trying to center this on the head, on that center stitching line, on the top point of each wing. Again, just adding glue to the stitching since that's all that will touch the cardstock below. You do not have to do the stitching. You can use these dies without the stitching, and it'll just add a nice detail without the stitching. There are spots included, and 2 of each of these will fit on each wing. The die cuts 2 of the circles at a time. Here is a traditionally colored ladybug, which I don't think I ultimately use in this video. There's also a flower with a large center and a small leaf. I've die cut the flower from some purple shimmery cardstock. It's actually some white cardstock that was sprayed with some Distress Mica stain spray in one of the purples, and the same with the green. That's some green cardstock spritzed with some, that actually might be the Hero Arts Tone on Tone metallic spray. And the sentiments that come with this are thanks so much, or thank you so much, and a gift for you. I'm going to add some gems to this purple ladybug. And this is the Twilight Crystal. These are from Trinity Stamps. They are an iridescent gem with purple, green, silver, different shine. I love that they have multiple colors in the scheme, and they work with so many different cool toned elements. You could add gems to your ladybugs without the circles, and you could use a variety of different colors. You could use pearls, sequins, gems, rhinestones. There's all kinds of great ways to add extra detail to these ladybug wings. I decided to use some of the smaller gems to add additional spots. And when you look at a ladybug, there are different sizes of spots, and they are not even necessarily evenly spaced across the wings of the ladybugs. But I sure had fun applying all of these gems. I didn't even have a project in mind yet when I created this. I just thought they looked really pretty on this purple ladybug. Next, I'm going to use the stencil of the month. This is Nature's Frame, and it is sized to fit on an A2 size card. I did try to think about how I would make this on a larger card, but ultimately only used it once. There are so many great elements in the club kits this month. I could have made far more than 10 cards. We're going to use Seedless Preserves, Wilted Violet, Tumbled Glass, Broken China, and I don't use the Twisted Citron. I just use the Mowed Lawn, and then I do pull in some black soot. And I also use some paste. We're going to start out with the Seedless Preserves, and we're using the first of the 5 stencils in this layering stencil set. This is the lighter of the purples. Well, honestly, Seedless Preserves is a very red purple, and Wilted Violet is a more blue purple. And they do actually play well together. We'll take our second layer, and this is going to add the turned up petal portions of the larger flowers, and then a few smaller flowers. I'm using the same pieces of tape over and over again. I did ultimately go ahead and buy a box of the paper tape that I am quite familiar with working with at work. This is a nice low-tack tape that you can reuse over and over again, just like the Best Ever Craft tape. I'm not sure that this is very good with heat, so I haven't used it with the Glimmer foiling. But I'm going to use the same 2 pieces of tape here for the entire stenciling. Now that I have added the second color to the larger flowers, I'm going to add a third color for the smaller flowers included here. And you could do them all the same color. You don't have to get all fussy like I did here. But I think it added some extra dimension. I really liked how this turned out. Time to remove this stencil and move on to the third stencil. And this is going to add more flowers in several groupings. I'm going to use another color for this. I'm going to use the Broken China, which is a slightly darker aqua blue. Just going to ink up my sponge. Actually, these sponges are very well seasoned. I have a dedicated handle and sponge for each of the Distress Oxide colors and each of the Distress Ink colors. That is just something that makes my life easier, and I have a way to store them. If you have limited space in your craft room, one handle and a sponge for each color family works very well also. I'm coming in and using the black soot to add the centers of the larger flowers. And I thought that would look very nice with the anemone or poppy style cupped flowers here. And I'm going to go straight to stencil number 5 here. This was stencil 3. Stencil 4 adds a smaller center to all of the flowers, but I'm going to save that one for last. You can see how that lines up nicely. And then I changed my mind. I'm not going to use that one now. I want to use some gold lunar paste for that layer. So we're going to do our last inking layer, and that will be the leaves that will complete this frame. You could use 2 tones of green here, but I chose to just use one. I'm just going to use the Mowed Lawn and fill in all of those leaves. There's a lot going on in this frame, and I have to say, even though this was my first use of this layering stencil, it is gorgeous. And I may yet figure out how I can use this on a 5x7 card, because we all know that's my favorite size. Now I do only make 3 not 5x7 sized cards in this video. And that's partly because so many of the clubs in this month's kits are very well suited to 5x7 cards. Now we're going to do our last layer, and we're going to use the Slippery When Wet Lunar Paste. This is one of my favorite of the lunar pastes. I use it very frequently, and I recently rehydrated, rejuvenated my paste. And the way I did that was I just took an eyedropper and some plain old tap water and added it to the paste and stirred it with a metal palette knife until it reached the consistency that I wanted it back to. And so it's now a nice loose paste, and it was very easy actually to rejuvenate. And it doesn't seem to have had any ill effects from using just plain old tap water. Some people will want to use distilled water, depends on your water. We have well water, and it is a very irony, very hard, lots of minerals in our water, and it doesn't seem to have affected the paste at all. I have what you might call an orange shower. Within 3 days of removing all of the hard water deposits, it is orange again. um, but I have good well water. I don't have to pay for it. That was the beautiful stenciled background. Now we're going to use the Better Press of the month, and it is called Take Flight. It has 2 butterflies and 3 sentiments and coordinating dies for all of those pieces. I am laying a piece of, I took that same piece of A2 sized copy paper, laid it down on my platform, and then I can just lay the plates down, cover them with foil, and add paper to them and not have to tape things down. And that makes it easy to repeat the same process. I'm also going to use these as intended as better press plates. I've got the smaller butterfly here on the platform, and I have a piece of 5x7 watercolor cardstock here. Now, because this area is divided into 4 quadrants, it's very easy for me to repeat this better pressing by just rotating the whole top portion. And I am using the Night Sky Lisa Horton Interference ink here, and that is a very squishy ink pad, and so you can see that it doesn't work the greatest for the sentiment portions, but the butterfly is gorgeous. Now I needed to let my platform heat up just a little more and add one more shim to get the perfect foiling for this butterfly. And you can use your Best Ever Craft tape to take any of the overfoiling off, and you can also use a clean, dry paintbrush to brush away any of the overfoiling. Now it's time to use the coordinating dies for all of these images and sentiments. I'm just going to line them up around each of these images, add a little bit of low-tack tape, which I have mine stuck to the mirror facing my work surface, and I just reuse them until they lose their stickiness. It only takes 2 pieces of tape to secure both the butterfly and the sentiment dies. This is the large butterfly, and it is gorgeous. Here is the sentiment. Thanks, you are the best. It also has that combination of scripty font and blocky font that the Clear Stampin' Die has. The bonus for the deluxe caboodle subscribers is a coordinating stencil for these butterflies in the Better Press plate. Now, I did decide to die cut my butterflies first, and you know what? I'm really happy I did. This works out so well. I have my Altenew sticky mat here. This is my smaller sticky mat because this is a smaller project or image. If you find that your sticky mat is not gripping your elements, just spritz it down with some water and wipe it dry again, and it'll restore the stickiness. I'm using the Seedless Preserves Wilted Violet salvage patina and broken china on these, and this was better pressed onto a piece of watercolor cardstock, which blends your Distress Oxide inks beautifully. There are 3 layers to each of these butterflies, and I used the purple combination on the first stencil. I'm using the aqua colored combination on the second stencil, and I'm using the lighter of each of these colors and then coming back and adding some depth and dimension with the darker color, using the side of my ink blender or just tilting it a little bit so I can be more specific of where I want to put the colors. For the third layer of this stencil, I'm going to use the solid gold Lisa Horton metallic ink here, and I am using a mini ink blending sponge that is dedicated to the gold pigment inks that I have in my stash. I did not find I needed a special sponge applicator for each of the gold inks that are pigment, and look at that. It just turns out so perfect. We'll do the smaller butterfly, which is also on the same stencil. I'm going to use the same colors as I did for each of the layers of the other butterfly, and that just really simplifies my process. I could have put both of the butterflies down at once, but I didn't think that far ahead. And I think it would have been a little extra tedious to line them both under the mask or under the stencil perfectly. When you die cut your image first for these stencils, it gives your stencils lots of space on the sticky mat to get stuck. And it makes it a lot easier to ink blend these without your stencil shifting at all. We're already on the gold layer here, and I really like how these turned out. I think I ink blended 2 sets of these butterflies, and I used almost all of them. When I am doing these 10 card videos, I do all of this prep work ahead of time without a real plan of how I'm going to use my items, and then go to town with it. Here is the wax seal of the month. This one is called Floral Jewel, and it's a 3D wax seal. This month, instead of getting wax beads, you're going to get one of these dividing trays. These are really handy. I'm going to use my divider tray to store all of my warm toned wax seal beads, and I'm using some of that paper tape I purchased to label each of the colors. So I'm going to write the name of the color and the order number or the item number on the bottom of all of these compartments. So it's easy for me to figure out which ones I need to refill. Now it's time to do some wax sealing here. I have some gold wax beads melted here on my warmed seal, and I'm using a warmed palette knife. This is how you can do the 2 tones on one wax seal. I am able to scrape off the excess gold wax on the warm spoon, and that works really well. Now I have the pink damask wax beads here melted. And with these larger seals, you do need more beads. I started with 3 beads of gold and 5 beads of the pink, and it turns out just lovely. Now, part of my wax seal did not come off. I do repeat that later and get a full sealing. Now it's time to move on to card number 1. I have 3 colors of Copic markers here, a pink, a yellow, and a blue, and I decided to do something crazy. I went through and colored all of these different sections of this weave here, the elliptical weave, to make it look like 3-toned rainbow arches everywhere. I really had a good time. It took me probably half an hour to do all of the coloring, and I did come back in with a second darker shading of each of these colors to add these, to make these a little more, give them a little more depth. You could get away with just doing one of each of these colors without the shading. They are pretty narrow little channels, and I'm only going to show you this small piece because the coloring is the same throughout the entire panel. Now I end up covering up a good chunk of this, so I didn't actually need to color all of it, but look at that. I think it is gorgeous. I'm going to come back and use some metallic watercolors here. These are my Daniel Smith, and these are the iridescent and duochrome and interference watercolors. I'm using a gold and a shimmery white, I think, and I spattered all over this background. Yep, there I'm using the second color, and I had taken my eyedropper and added a little bit of water to each of these little pots, because with any of the metallic watercolors, you do really have to work that paint up to get the thickness and the amount of paint that you want to create the spatters. Unlike other watercolors where you just take a wet brush and just touch the paint and it comes instantly off. Next, we're going to take the 5x7 Matting Basics Set B, and this is the largest of those dies because, of course, I want to do a 5x7 card. This panel was 2 foilings of that elliptical weave pattern, and I like how it lined up in the middle. So I centered that nicely over the pattern, and I've added some extra cardstock behind this layer. We're going to adhere that to a 5x7 heavyweight white cardstock base. And I just stood and looked at this for a little bit. I thought it was so pretty. Then I decided to add some of these butterflies. I took the foiled versions, and we're going to use Kitsch Flamingo, Salvaged Patina, and Scattered Straw to mimic the colors that I did on with the Copics. I'm also using the coordinating stencil, and we're going to ink blend these colors on to our butterflies. I'm starting with the yellow on layer number 1. And instead of doing one full butterfly and then coming back and doing the second, I'm just going to line up the stencil for each color on each of the butterflies and add the color. There's our yellow. Now it's time for stencil number 2. I do believe I'm going to use the pink next. This is the Kitsch Flamingo. And this colors super fast. I really do like having cut these butterflies out before I did the stenciling. It really sped things up. And I don't have to worry about accidentally ruining my image by doing the die cutting after I've done the most work. We're going to move on to the blue, and I'm using Salvage Patina here, and I'm going to compare these colors here in a minute and change my mind and have to redo the blue. But that's the nice thing about Distress Oxides. You can layer the colors up. They do lay over the top of each other. They're a hybrid ink, a mix of dye and pigment. So they sit on top of the paper instead of actually dyeing the paper. And that turned out pretty. It just doesn't match the blue very well on this background. So I switched to Salty Ocean, and we'll just go back over and add that blue over the top of the Salvage Patina, and that'll be a much better match to our background. Part of the reason I have almost all of the products that Tim Holtz has released with his Distress inks is because you have multiple products that coordinate with each other across an entire palette. And that is a wonderful thing. Now, most Copics, you can find a Distress Oxide combination that will coordinate. We're also going to pull in the Essential Stylish Ovals, and I decided to die cut a piece of vellum with one of those with the larger layer, and a piece of white cardstock with the lighter layer. And we're going to use the embossing folder of the month called Faceted Petals. Now, I finally got smart. I've been writing the names of these embossing folders on my embossing folders with Sharpies forever. And I decided to add a piece of clear tape over the top of it to make sure that the writing doesn't come off when I'm using it. We're also going to use some solar paste. This is the Golden Hour solar paste. I wanted to add a little extra shine to this embossed area. So I'm using my fingertip to apply the Golden Hour solar paste to this piece of cardstock. I added some extra cardstock between each of these layers. So we're adhering the embossed and golden hour gilded panel to the vellum panel. And there's a piece of cardstock behind the vellum also. This helps give that impression of floating over the background. Now you can see that I've covered up a large chunk of that colored pattern, but I really like how this makes the butterflies really stand out from the background so they don't just fade into too much busyness. We're giving them a good place to land. I'm also taking a sentiment from the clear stamp and die of the month, and this reads, sending you a little flutter of happiness. And I think that's perfect with these butterflies. We'll take the larger butterfly and add glue just to the body portion, and I've bent up the wings to add a little extra dimension here. And we'll do that with the smaller butterfly also, angling it so that it does not cover too much of the sentiment. I have a third butterfly. This is another of the smaller butterflies that I have foiled, ink blended, die cut. And we have another sentiment from the clear stamp and die of the month. I'm adhering those to the inside and they just beautifully coordinate with the rest of the card. Now that all of that is adhered, we're going to take some Aura Opalescent Color Essential Sequins. These are gorgeous. They're a light creamy white/yellow with some iridescence that picks up all of those lovely warm tones. And I'm adding a scattering of these sequins throughout just to help tie everything together. I think the addition of the sequins really brought everything together. Again, just using my fine tip glue pen or glue and my pickup stick to help pick up each of these elements and add them to the little dot of glue that I add to the cardstock. I continue to add sequins to the insides of my cards and die cuts, and I really like how this turned out. So that was card number 1. Card number 2, we're going to use the Perfect Touch Rectangles and Tag die set, and we're going to use that to cut out the stencil of the month panel that I created. Now this adds a lovely little detail along the edge. We're also going to use the Essential Stylish Ovals and the Stylized Lattice, which is the 3D embossing folder of the month, to create a place in the center of this card for another butterfly to land. The embossing on this 3D embossing folder of the month is absolutely stunning. It is deep and detailed and gorgeous. I did die cut that oval first and then did the embossing. And now I've added a little layer of, I didn't add any extra cardstock behind the stenciled panel because it is the same size as our card base, which is an A2 size card. This is the only A2 size card that I create in this entire 10 card series or video. Sorry, it's just one video. And then we're going to add the layer of cardstock behind the oval, and we're going to use the Take Flight Better Press of the Month butterfly that I better pressed and with Night Sky Interference ink, and then ink blended after I die cut the butterfly. We'll add a little glue just to the center of this butterfly, and then we'll add glue to the back of the sentiment that is also from this Better Press of the Month that had a coordinating die. It says, a little note to cheer up your day. I did cut a couple extra layers of cardstock for the sentiment here to make that really pop up and to adhere nicely on that very textured background. We're going to take that Take Flight layered stencil, which is the bonus item for the Deluxe Caboodle subscribers, and we're going to add these butterflies stenciled, just the stencil on the inside of the card. I'm using the same colors I used earlier when I did the ink blending on the Better Pressed and die cut butterfly. So I'm using, oh, I only used one of the colors though. I started with the gold and I go on to the second layer. I'm checking what colors I used on the front of the card. So can use the same colors on the inside or the same order. So I used I think that's Broken China. and the solid gold for the gold. And then for the purple, I believe I just used the seedless preserves. Just getting that really well lined up, and I'm holding it in place just with my fingers. For this particular butterfly, that worked out perfectly. Now I decided I needed the second butterfly, the larger butterfly, up at um, over the center fold of the inside of the card. And so I'm lining that up, and I ended up actually adding a piece of tape because it wanted to shift. I think it probably had to do with the fact that it was on the fold, that it was harder to hold down with just my fingers. I could have pulled out my sticky mat. That would have been the smart thing to do, but sometimes you get in the groove and you just don't want to slow down enough to reach for another item. Well, or you get cocky and think you can just hold it in place. This did work out really well. I did get a smudge on the upper right-hand corner of the inside of this card, but I did come back in with just a sander, a little sanding block, and sanded off that smudge of blue ink. My method for removing smudges is to try an eraser first and then the sanding block. And if that doesn't work, I either cover it with an embellishment or I try to use a white glue gel pen to cover up any of those smudges, or I just let it ride. That is card number 2. I really like how that turned out. Card number 3, we're going to take a black piece of cardstock that I have foiled with some silver foil and the elliptical weave. We're also going to use the atrium that we created earlier with the large die of the month, the Botanical atrium. And we're going to use some sentiments from the clear Stampin' Die of the Month, Nature's Dance. Now it's time to start assembling all of this. I am going to take the black foiled half sheet of cardstock, and I'm going to use the 5x7 Matting Basics Set B, the largest die. I swear I use this die more than any other die in my entire craft room. I've cut that down, and I have another piece of cardstock that is left over from that half sheet that we've cut for a panel for the 5x7 card front. I've layered up 2 layers of extra cardstock behind the word hugs and added extra cardstock behind the foiled panel. We're going to adhere this to a 5x7 black card base. This is a fairly lightweight cardstock that I'm using for the card base, and I think it's like 80 pounds. For me, that's lightweight. I like my card bases to be 100 to 120 pound card stock. But we're going to add a white layer to the inside. I've taken this leftover scrap of the foiled paper and adhered that to the bottom portion of this white panel that I die cut with the same die as I did for the front of the card. We're going to adhere that to the inside of the card, and that's going to add a little extra heft and stability to the card base and leave a good place to do your sentiment. Now that I have all of those layers adhered, I put my Misty on top of that to help all of the layers get a good solid flat adherence. I added an extra layer of cardstock behind our assembled atrium and adhered that to the front of the card fairly centered. I'm going to add the hugs sentiment on part of the atrium that is not covered in flowers. And then we'll take our inside sentiment, add a little glue to that. It's already been stamped, heat embossed, and die cut with the coordinating die. And we'll center that in that black foiled piece on the inside of the card. May your year ahead be filled with grace and new adventures. I think that works for a lot of different occasions. Card number 4, we're going to use the salvage patina, broken china, seedless preserves, and wilted violet combination again. I have a half sheet of cardstock, and we're going to start with the wilted violet distress oxide ink, and we're going to create an ink blend on this piece of cardstock. I really enjoy creating ink blended backgrounds, and it really helps to customize all of your different elements so that they coordinate with each other. Now I'm taking the lighter, what I considered the lighter of the colors, and adding those towards the center of the card. So I've got the wilted violet bleeding into or blending into the seedless preserves, and then we have salvage patina next to the seedless preserves, and then broken china. I might need to rehydrate these ink pads again. It's winter and things are very dry here. I'm going to come back over and ink blend over these transitions a couple of times, going back and forth until I get a blend that I'm happy with. And that looks pretty good. I'm going to take that watercolor that I had already rehydrated earlier, and I'm spattering on some of the shimmery white watercolor. And it just adds a nice spattering of color and shimmer here. We'll pull out my favorite die, the 5x7 Matting Basics Set B, the largest die, and we're going to use the Faceted Petals embossing folder of the month after I've die cut this panel to the size I like. Next, I'm going to figure out how I want to create this card. This is from the die that die cuts out the center of this oval, and then which is also from the Stitched Ladybug stitching die of the month. I have my purple stitched oval, and I'm adding some extra cardstock to the back of this layer before I adhere it to our 5x7 card base. This is a heavyweight white cardstock base. And next we're going to add our bejeweled purple ladybug to the center of the vellum piece. And I have used the sentiments, "Thank you so much." I'm adding, am I adding extra layers? Yes, I think I add 2 layers to the top portion here behind the "thank you" and the "so much," which I die cut from some of the satin silver metallic cardstock from the Silver Assortment Treasured Cardstock Pack. Now, the cardstocks, including the metallic treasured cardstock packets, are currently on sale at Spellbinders, or at least they were at the time of this voiceover. So if you haven't gotten any of them, now is a great time to do that because they are at a discounted price. I'm going to add these perfectly arched sentiments above and below our ladybug. I know often I use things a little differently than they are shown on the packaging, but this just seemed so well coordinated that I had to do it the way it was pictured on the packaging, at least once. Now that I have that portion adhered, we're going to flip over the vellum and add a single layer of cardstock behind all of these different elements, again, so that this has a little bit of that impression of floating, the vellum floating above the layer behind it. I like to use the same die to cut up the cardstock that's going to go behind things on vellum. It just makes things very perfect. The ladybug was large enough for me to just use some scraps, some square scraps to put behind there. I didn't have to die cut that ladybug body. Now that we have the extra layers behind everything, and I do have like 3 extra layers behind that stitching element because the stitching adds so much bulk, we'll now adhere that to the front of the card. I almost stopped there, but I decided to take some of the foliage from the Botanical Atrium large die of the month and cut those all from some apple green or an appley green. I think this is kind of like the peridot cardstock that Spellbinders sells, but this was like a jade green. This might even have been a paper tray ink cardstock that I then spritzed with the Hero Arts green spritz, metallic spritz, which I believe is green ink and gold mica. It's a very nice shimmeriness. I have 2 of each of these different foliage types, and I'm just adding these in a mirror of each other to create some nice foliage behind the oval panel. I thought that really needed a little extra behind the stitched oval panel. I'm not sure why. I mean, I thought it was cute, but I think it needed that punch of green to really make everything um, as cohesive as it could. I love all of the cards that I created in this 10 card video, but if there are two that that were not my most favorite, it will be the two that I used the stitched die of the month, just because I think I was trying to go way too over the top. I do like this card. I do, but it isn't like my best work. I could have added those little flowers along the stitching. I think that would have been pretty too. But I decided to just use two of the flowers in each of the top corners of this card. They're very easy to assemble. It has a large center, the floral does, and you could add gems to these also. And then just the little leaf that tucks behind the flower. The flowers are from the Stitching Die of the Month. This is the Crystal Twilight Embellishment Mix, the gems that I had used on the back of our ladybug. And I decided to pull that into the rest of the design by adding several more of these gems scattered throughout the front of the card. I like to do groupings of 3, and I did 2 different sizes in each of those groupings. There are, I believe, 5 sizes of gems in this color mix. I love that there are so many different sizes. That really helps me customize things the way I feel they should be. And I had historically not used the largest gems very often, but I'm finding more and more great uses for those very large gems in these mixes. These mixes last a long time if you're not using them as a shaker element, if you're just adding the gems as individual embellishments on the fronts of your card. Now these are too thick to put on the inside of the card, but I can put a few more of the foliage die cuts on the inside to coordinate the front and the back. I could have also taken another of those ladybugs without the stitching and add that to the inside. I don't put a sentiment on the inside of this one at all, and I do a little modifying on the stems on these leaves. I didn't put a lot of thought into the arrangement of these leaves. I just wanted to fill that corner with a nice cohesive little bunch of foliage. And that completes card number, is this card number 4? I believe so. On to card number 5. We're going to pull out that 5x7 Matting Basics Set B largest die again. I have a piece of watercolor cardstock that I cut down to size with that die. I'm going to do some ink blending with the Tattered Rose Distress Oxide ink. Just going to cover this entire panel with the Tattered Rose Distress Oxide ink. Now, this is watercolor cardstock, so it's going to have the greatest impact when you do some ink spattering or water spattering, and you're going to get some really awesome effects on a watercolor cardstock that you cannot achieve on a plain cardstock. So I'm taking some clean, clear water here and just spattering the heck out of this. And you can see the blooms appearing all over it. And then I'm going to, after it's dried, I'm going to spritz it with some Distress Spritz in Antique Linen and Tattered Rose. I am actually going to spray, and when you partially push down the pump, you get bigger spatters of the spray. And I'm doing a mix of fine mist and chunky spatters here. I will heat dry this with my heat tool. And before I put away the Distress Spritz bottles, I'm going to spatter the inside of this card base. Just making sure that it's well mixed so that the mica is well dispersed in the liquid in these spritzes, and then spattering it. Next, we're going to use some elements of the Botanical atrium. We're going to make a shaker card. So I'm using the larger solid die, cutting an aperture, and then taking that panel and running it through the embossing folder, Faceted Petals. Next, I took a piece of recycled acetate. This is from some packaging from some crafting products that I've trimmed down to slightly smaller than this panel. I'm using some double-sided tape here to adhere the acetate, which works faster than if you used liquid glue. You could use liquid glue, but again, this is faster, and I have a ton of this double-sided tape in my stash. Well, just add that acetate to create a nice window for our shaker. And because I didn't line this up correctly, I have some of the acetate hanging over the edge. I'll just use my scissor to trim off the excess, and that will work perfectly. I'll just clean up that mess from all those bits, and we'll move on to the next step. I have some strips, some thin strips of foam here, and these are 2 millimeter thick. Spellbinders carries the same strips. And when you take the backing off, and these don't have backing, this was defective product that I got for free, so it didn't get thrown away. But when you take the backing off, so you don't have backing on the second sticky side, you can shape it much more easily than if you left the backer on. I'm also adding the same foam along the edges of the cardstock to make sure it has the same height of dimension all the way around. One more little piece here in the edge. I'm just going to trim that off and fill in any of the gaps. And then I'm going to add this at the top above the arches to make sure that's nice and even. Next, I dug through my stash of sequins and embellishments, and I found this sequins mix from Hero Arts. It's called Champagne, and it's actually still for sale and is on sale for like $3 for this packet. I will have that listed in the description box below. I'm spreading out this mix of sequins, and now I'm going to cap this off with another piece of cardstock. I'm just going to use a piece of white cardstock that's slightly smaller than our panel. I like to create my shaker elements this way so that I don't have to worry about, am I lining up the shaker part with the card base. This way I just encapsulate the shaker and then I add this as one solid piece to the card base, and it's much easier to contain the sequins and make sure that it is well centered on our card front. There we go. We got our shaky shake. Now I, in retrospect, should have put our filigreed atrium together on the acetate before I created the shaker compartment, but there we go. I'm going to take the butterflies from the large die of the month and a foiled sentiment from the better press of the month that I've foiled and die cut already. I'll adhere that to the inside of the card where I have spattered with the Distress Spritz in tattered rose and antique linen. We'll adhere the butterflies that are cut from some glitter cardstock above and below the sentiment. And then we'll take our shaker component, add some glue to the back of this, and adhere it to the card front. And this way it'll be nice and centered. Next, I will need to, I'm taking some of the extra glue that seeped out from behind the foam strips, picking that up with the end of my pointy tool. And I will use a reverse tweezer. Now, I cannot find my good reverse tweezers. These are not as good as my other set. They don't have that extra pointy tip, so it's harder to pick things up off of the surface, and they don't have as good a firm grip. I suspect that when I had family over for Christmas and everyone was availing themselves of my craft space, which is actually half of our great room. So it's not a separated from the main living space work area. And I don't mind. I do like to share my crafty stuff with family, but I think my reverse tweezers walked away. They're probably somewhere in the house, and as soon as I get a replacement, I will find them again. That is how it always works. Now that I've adhered our little atrium to that acetate window, now I'm going to add some greenery from the large die of the month. This is the branch of leaves that looks to me like a sweet pea vine. I've taken 2 of these and I'm going to create a little frame for our lovely rose wax seal. Now I did these in golden wax beads and pink damask. And I love the contrast here. They both are a very pearly, shiny wax, and that rose just glows on that pink background. I'll add a little bit of the Barely Art Precision Glue to the back of the wax seal, and I have no problems with this sticking to my projects. They do not pop off using the liquid glue. Give that a good shaky shake. And I have adhered a sentiment to the top, and we're all done with card number 5. Card number 6, we're going to use that 5x7 matting basic set B with some white cardstock, and then we're going to use the stylized lattice 3D embossing folder of the month. Again, this is such a stunning embossing folder, deep and gorgeous. We're also going to use the Botanical atrium set again. I have one of the large large pieces for the atrium. We're going to use the gold assorted pack and the pearlized gold cardstock to cut the detailed section of this atrium. Just going to flick out all of those extra pieces, and I think I have to use my pokey tool for just a couple of them. Look at that. I love how that turned out. Next, we're going to use the solar paste in Golden Hour, and I'm going to apply this with my fingertip to the embossed areas of this large panel. It does take a minute or two to cover the entire panel, but I think it's well worth the time. Plus, if you're like me and you like to get your fingers into your art, this satisfies that finger painting itch you might have. It cleans up off of your finger very easily with a little bit of water. And I do actually use my microfiber cloth, my cleaning cloth, to get it off my finger also. And it seems to wash out perfectly fine in the washing machine. It is a water-based paste. I did not refresh this one because I haven't had this jar very long. My slippery when wet jar, I think I've had that particular jar for like 2 years, and I've had this one for about 6 or 8 months. Here I am cleaning my finger and my work surface. I just have a large household spray bottle with soapy dishwater. It's just a few drops of dishwater in that jug of water. And that's what I use to do all of my cleaning. Next, we're going to actually adhere our foliage and flowers directly to this base before we glue down the atrium. Adding little dots of glue behind the flowers. I did lay these pieces out ahead of time, so I had a rough idea of how they wanted to go, or rather how I want them to go. Now I'm just laying them out, and you don't have to be exact about how you do this. In fact, you're going to see that I don't get my placement exactly the way I want it. And you'll see just how quick the Barely Art glue gets super tacky. So I'm going to put this branch of leaves down, and I let it get good and attached, and I go and put my second flower of this grouping of 3 down. And I'm going to add a little extra cardstock behind this larger full front flower. And I want this to be a little taller. I like to use scraps of paper for this, but you could use dimensional foam or whatever you like. I just like to make use of what I have. Now I need to adjust the placement of one of those flowers, and then the greenery won't show up. And boy, howdy, that is stuck down. So I'm just going to take another branch of leaves here, and I'm going to split it up and share the greenery here. And then I will reattach that side-facing bloom and get my placement the way I want it. I'm going to try to center it, this larger bloom, over the 2 side-facing blooms a little evenly. Now to apply the fine detail atrium piece, I'm adding dots of glue in some strategic spots. These are mostly at different intersections, and I do make sure that I put glue at the tip of the top and on the corners on the bottom to make sure that it all adheres very nicely. And surprisingly, or I don't know why I was surprised, but this fits over your elements very nicely. But I can't just put a heavyweight block on top of it because it's very uneven. So I just use the pressure from my hands to make sure everything is nicely adhered over the top. Next, I'm going to use some amber glow embellishments. These are some rhinestones, also from Trinity Stamps, and they are still available. There are, I think, 4 different sizes of these gems, and I'm going to add these as centers to the flowers on that branch. I'm also going to add a scattering of the gems on each side of the blossoms inside the atrium. I just thought that really added a little extra pizzazz to the inside of the atrium that it needed. Just adding little dots of glue where I want to put my rhinestones and using my pickup tool, which I find is invaluable. Between the pickup tool and my reverse tweezers and my fine tip glue bottle, those are some of the most important pieces in my crafting space. That and of course my Glimmer foil system, my die cutting machine, my letterpress, and my guillotine trimmer. Those are crafting essentials to me. Now that I have my atrium all assembled, we'll add a sentiment from the Glimmer foil elliptical weave. And I did discover that the smallest ovals in both the modern ovals and the stylish ovals are the same height and different lengths. So they fit perfectly around the sentiments from the Glimmer foil. You may have to do some partial cutting to get the length that you want. And I just line this up so the space uh, top and bottom and side to side are the same around the sentiment. I just make sure that the plates only cover the part of the die that I want to actually cut, and that way I don't have any accidental cutting. After the first cut, I move it so that the end lines up where I want it to, making sure that the the cutting edge of the die slips back into the grooves of the previous cutting. I added some extra cardstock behind the embossed 3D embossed panel, and we will adhere that to our 5x7 card base. I think I have 7 5x7 cards in this particular video. So if you are not a 5x7 card lover, I'm sorry. A lot of these designs are adaptable to an A2 size card, but it's going to be a very crowded card. This atrium will fit on a 5x7 card base, but it will be a tight fit. It will fill your entire card. It also would make a very nice shaped card, which I did not do this time. I'm adding this sentiment that says congrats near the top of the atrium. And then we're going to use another sentiment from the Better Press of the month, Take Flight. This one says, hope your day takes flight. We're also going to add another sprig of these flowers, and I didn't put any centers on this. There is a die in the large die of the month that will cut the centers for those flowers, but I chose to just let that ride. We're just going to leave no centers on those flowers. I'm going to adhere the sentiment right over the bottom of that stem. This would be a perfect place on the front of a card, if you use this as a card front, to add one of the wax seals. Next, we're going to use some Distress Mica stains in Shiny Bauble, Merry Mint, and I think that said Hocus Pocus. And we're going to spritz this on a piece of heavyweight white cardstock. This is a half sheet of 100-pound cardstock. I've spritzed it first with the purple, next with the blue, and then we will do the minty green. I really like how quickly this colors and creates shimmer on a piece of cardstock. This would work really well on watercolor cardstock also, and I'm not sure why I didn't choose to do that. That is designed to take all of that extra liquid. I did heat set that with my heat tool, and now we're going to trim it down with the 5x7 Matting Basics Set B largest die, and we'll put it through the Faceted Petals embossing folder of the month. Look at that shine and detail, just stunning. I'm also going to finally use the Soaring Dragonfly. We're going to use that dragonfly that I assembled at the beginning. I'm also going to take the Distress Mica Stain in Phantom Mist and spritz that on another piece of white, heavyweight white cardstock. And I will heat set that with my heat tool. We'll also use the Emerald Cut Labels and Tag die set. I'm going to use the second largest detail die. This cuts little embossed detail around that emerald cut. We're also going to take the inset die and die cut that from some brushed white cardstock and then run that through the same embossing folder, the Faceted Petals. And we will add extra cardstock behind all of these layers and start assembling our card. I have another 5x7 white card base here, and I am adhering our Distress Mica Stain sprayed and embossed background. Then I will add the layer onto the emerald cut silver with the white. I have extra pieces of cardstock, extra layers of cardstock behind each of these. I'm going to roughly center this on the card front. I could have gone just a little higher and let that dragonfly be more on the lower portion. And then I'm overlapping all of these pieces to get my placement. I have a couple of branches of the flowers that come on the dragonfly die set and the sentiment, that beautiful scripty hello sentiment. I've die cut that with some silver glitter cardstock and then 2 layers of plain white cardstock, and I'm stacking those up together. I add a little glue, some dots of glue on the back of the scripty sentiment, and then using my reverse tweezers, lining it up with the next layer. After 3 layers total with the glitter cardstock and the 2 white cardstock layers, I have a very nice thick sentiment that will stand out beautifully on the front of the card. I'm adding some glue behind our dragonfly. I didn't add any extra layers of cardstock behind any of the pieces here, and I'm just adhering it down to the card front. And there is a difference in height between those emerald cut layers and the card front, but the dragonfly is a long, thin piece, so it's very easy to adhere that to the card base and not have it look extra lumpy bumpy. It just seems to land on there very nicely. I add some dots of glue behind the little branches and leaves and petals and tuck those in between the 2 segments of wings on the dragonfly on each side. I'm actually going to tuck the end of the stem under the brushed white layer, the second stem on each end. Now we'll add some little dots of glue behind the scripty hello and adhere that over the white, brushed white area. And you could stop here. I'm just trying to get my placement. You don't have to add a secondary sentiment, but I end up doing that later. We're going to use the Twinkling Tourmaline gems here. These are an iridescent purple gem, and I decided to add those to the centers of these flowers instead of die cutting the centers. I do add some flowers to the inside of the card, and you'll see how we will address that in a minute. Just adding little dots of glue, actually slightly larger than little because there's a hole in the center of these flowers. And if the hole fell out, then it's a little harder to get the gem to adhere unless you add extra glue. I'm using the smallest of the gems to add the centers to all of these little flowers. I think there are a total of 12 flowers on the front of this card. And the flowers are actually die cut from some cardstock that was ink blended with tattered rose and then spritzed with the tattered rose distress spritz spray. Now it's time to assemble the flowers that are going to go on the inside of the card. Just going to add the little tattered rose colored flowers. And then I die cut from the leftovers from that Distress Mica Stain sprayed panel. There was a purple section. I used the die to cut out those centers and attached those. Next, we're going to use the Nature's Dance clear stamp and die. I've taken 4 of the sentiments from this set, and I initially used the Silver Shine metallic ink, and I inked this up 3 times, I believe, and then used some silver embossing powder. And this did not emboss the way I really wanted it to, but I'm going to show you the process here. I did go back and use some clear embossing ink with 3 stampings, of course, and then go back and emboss again with the silver embossing powder. I did not film it a second time because the process is exactly the same, but the result was a little better with the clear embossing powder. No, sorry, clear embossing ink. And it is silver embossing powder. This is actually called sterling. It's an old, like probably 20-year-old bottle of embossing powder from Stampin' Up. That stuff has a forever um, shelf life. So I chose the Sending You a Little Flutter of Happiness to add under this hello for a sub-sentiment. And I did add a couple layers of extra cardstock behind our die cut sentiment to make sure it stood up evenly underneath the hello. Actually, I think the hello is still just a touch taller, but this is a great, it really fits in nicely this way. Inside the card, I'm adding a second sentiment. This one says, "May your birthday be filled with great moments." And we're going to add those 4 branches of flowers and leaves on the inside of the card. I decided to frame up that sentiment with these branches of leaves, and I really like how it turned out, although it's not completely centered and even. But we're not going for perfect anyway. These are handmade, and there will be little irregularities and imperfections or just little quirks. And that's completely okay. We have to learn to accept that everything doesn't have to look absolutely perfect. I do love having die cut sentiments because then I can place them wherever I want, and the risk of messing up the inside of my card is low. All right, time for card number 8. Now, this is another card I am not absolutely thrilled with how it completely came together, but it's fun anyway. I decided to make another shaker card. I have this stitched frame that I created using white cardstock and a darker green crochet thread. I'm using some double-sided tape here to add the acetate that I die cut with the same frame that cuts out the larger, the outline of this stitched element. I am again using some recycled acetate from some packaging to create the clear portion of this window, and I will just adhere that to our frame. And since I die cut it with the same die, theoretically I should be able to get this to line up perfectly. Of course, I don't. It's a little off center. It is going to cover the entire window, but I need to trim off a little bit of the extra acetate so it doesn't hang beyond the edges of this frame. Once I have that trimmed off, then it's ready for the next step. Now I am learning from my past mistakes, and I'm going to adhere anything that needs to go onto the acetate before I create the shaker compartment on the back of this. I chose the sentiment, a gift for you, and I am adhering that. I have cut this from some green cardstock that was spritzed with some, I'm not sure, I think it was the Hero Arts green and gold tone metallic spray or shiny spray. Now it's time to construct our shaker compartment. I'm using the thin foam strips, and these are 2 millimeter thickness. And I am just placing the foam strip all the way around the oval down the center of the stitching. I need just a smidgen more to completely enclose this compartment, just trimming that off the end of one of the foam strips. I did contemplate making this into just a shaker tag, and I kind of wish I'd done that. It would have made a really cute tag. I also am taking one of these stylish ovals and I am cutting one just a little smaller than the outer oval and a little bigger than the foam strip oval. Now I'm taking some sequins from my stash. These are actually from a past card kit, and these are some clay pieces from Trinity Stamps. I think they're called Garden Glow. There's some very pastel colored clay floral slices. After adding all of my hand-created mix, I decided that I needed a little bit of gold. So I found some gold sequins to add to the inside of the card, or sorry, inside the shaker compartment. And these are also from my stash of previous Spellbinders card kit embellishments. The back of the shaker is going to be a craft cardstock that I die cut with that oval. And these match up perfectly with that. I believe it's the stylish oval. It's the shorter oval die set. Then I'm going to assemble one of these ladybugs that I've die cut from some satin silver cardstock and some distress mica stain sprayed cardstock that I then stitched with some white crochet thread. I'm adding glue just to the stitching again because that's what's going to make contact with the cardstock below it. And I am going to make this ladybug a little more closed with its wings. And I did not decide to put any extra spots or gems on the back of this one. The heavyweight block really helps all of that stitched element adhere to the metallic cardstock. Then I have some dimensional foam. These are from past card kits also. And I stuck a couple pieces on the frame under where I want the ladybug to rest and adhered those. This is going to be a pretty tall card. Next, I have this piece of watercolor cardstock that I did direct to paper with this ombre ink pad, the Spring Day. I had just re-inked it and spritzed it with some ink refresher, and it was super juicy, and I had this in my stash of things to use for a while. I'm going to trim it down with the 5x7 matting basics set B largest die, and then I'm going to emboss it with this stylized lattice 3D embossing folder of the month. After I've done that, I add some extra strips of cardstock on the back of it and glue it to a 5x7 card base. While this does match the other elements of this card, I do think that I should have gone with something a little less bold in color to make this card, and I think it would have just been a little more pleasing to my eye. Although, you know, sometimes you just need to step away from your project to like it again. It is a fun shaker. I do love all of the shaker elements here. And I did create a second ladybug, and I did put silver spots on this one. This one doesn't have any stitching on it though. Inside, I add another sentiment. This one says, "Hope your day takes flight with joy." And that is from the Nature's Path Clear Stamp and Die of the Month. That completes card number 8. Now we're going on to card number 9. We're going to use the faceted petals on some brushed white cardstock, and we're going to use some flowers from the Botanical Atrium. When I was making the flowers with the Botanical Atrium, I kind of went a little crazy. I have a lot of different flowers here. I laid these all out on this 3¼ by 6¼ inch panel that I embossed with the faceted petals, and I am just going to start adhering them. I wanted an all over background with these die cut and layered elements, and I'm using all the same greens and different colored flowers. These were all made with colored cardstock or white cardstock that was spritzed with Distress Mica stain sprays and Distress spritzes to create a shiny and variated color. The greens were just straight up green cardstock in kind of an apple green. It's similar to the peridot cardstock from Spellbinders. Just adding little dots of glue all over on the backs of these branches of leaves. I don't think I added any extra cardstock on the back of any of these flowers. I do trim off some of the stems because I know that they're not going to actually fit into the layout here. I tried to make sure that we got all kinds of different colors of flowers here, and we didn't have any similar colors touching each other or near each other. Now that I have all of the leaves and the flowers adhered, I will trim off the parts that are hanging over the edge. And I will save a couple of the viney pieces and adhere those back to the front of the card to fill any of the open spaces. Now I could have really layered on extra pieces and made this a really full background, but I didn't want it to be too overwhelming. I am just going to trim off this last little piece, and then it's time to add some butterflies. I did contemplate using more of those pieces, but again, I didn't want it to be too full. Oh, and I found a leaf that didn't have enough glue under it. Let's adhere this to our mini slimline card. This is a 3½ by 6½ inch card base. So this will have a thin margin around the edges. I'll add my heavyweight block to help that get well adhered. I'm going to add the "Thanks, you are the best" sentiment from the Better Press of the month. This is still left over from my previous foiling. And I'm adding 2 extra layers of cardstock behind that. This is from the Take Flight Better Press of the month. And then I will place that on the front of the card, trying not to overlap on any of the flowers because I want all of the flowers to show. Next, I have a gold, actually I think I used 2 gold butterflies, one of each size, and we're going to frame up that sentiment with the butterflies. The smaller one above and the larger one below the sentiment. Again, just adding glue behind the body of each of those butterflies. I think that looks good. And on the inside, since I have so many extra pieces left, I'm going to take a branch of greenery and 3 flowers and add those to the inside. I'm using 3 different styles of flowers here in 3 different colors, just layering them up on the inside. This looks like a lot, but it does not affect the ability of the card to close properly. Now that I have those 3 primary colors, we're going to add the sentiment which says, "Thank you for your generosity." So it's a little repetitive. It says, "Thanks, you are the best" on the front, and "Thank you for your generosity" on the inside, but I think it's still pretty sweet. Next, we're going to use ripe persimmon, saltwater taffy, and tattered rose to create an ink blended background for our card number 10. Can you believe we are to card number 10 already? I'm going to add the ripe persimmon right in the middle of this piece of cardstock, and then we'll come back and ink blend some saltwater taffy over the top of this. Just trying to get a nice blend here. I want this to have a nice warm glow emanating from the center of the cardstock. We're going to come in with the tattered rose and ink blend that also. around the edges of the saltwater taffy. And I did contemplate just ink blending the center of this and not going all the way to the edges, but ultimately I did do the entire 5.5 by 8.5 inch piece of cardstock. This is a piece of hammermill cardstock, 80 pound, because I'm going to do some glimmer foiling on this after I'm done with the ink blending. I swear that ink blending on your cardstock makes the glimmer foil even better. We're going to use the elliptical wave Glimmer of the Month plate, and we're going to foil this twice on the cardstock like I've done so many times before on this video, but I just love how this turns out. Just securing it with a piece of Best Ever Craft tape and letting that heat up completely, running it through the die cut machine, and look at that reveal. It is just beautiful. Then I line this up with the previous foiling and use the silver foil again. And we're going to get a piece big enough to cover another mini slimline card. You do not have to use the entire panel. I just really wanted that beautiful pattern. Here I've trimmed it down to 6 1/4 by 3 1/4 from the center of that cardstock. And I will take a dragonfly that I've assembled. I die cut these pieces from brushed black, some metallic silver, the very shiny one, and then the wings are out of some glitter cardstock from Tonic Studio. This is one of their ombre ones. I don't remember what it was. Arabian Nights, maybe it's called. It's one of their newer glitter cardstocks that I've only found available on the Tonic website. I love their glitter paper. It is absolutely stunning. And I don't actually get very much of the ombre effect on this particular, because these pieces are too small, I imagine. But I tend to like to use just little bits of glitter paper because otherwise it's just too much. It's a great accent. Here I'm using my T-square ruler to make sure that I get my sentiment very evenly or level on the card. And I did not add any extra cardstock shims or pieces behind that. This is from the Clear Stampin' Die of the Month, Nature Paths, Natural Paths. I've already forgotten. It's beautiful. Anyway, it says just a little note to lift your spirits. I'm going to trim off the parts of the dragonfly wings that are hanging over the edge. Next, we're going to use some Black Magic rhinestones. These have an orangey look to them, or iridescence to them with a black base. Orange, yellow, gold, that all shimmers through on these gems. I've had a blast digging through my stash of embellishments to use on the cards this time. We all have a stash of these things, I'm sure, unless you've just started in card making. And then don't think you have to rush out and get all of the things. Just little bits at a time, you will build a stash that, like the rest of us, will be more than you can use in your lifetime. I hope you enjoyed this video. I, of course, enjoyed creating with all of those things. I still have a ton of pieces left, and I'm sure they'll make their way into some cards in the near future. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't done that. Leave me a comment. I would love to hear what you have to say about the projects I used today or the club kits. And if you're interested in any of the product that I used today, check that description box below. It will be listed and linked as always. Until next time, here are a couple more videos I thought you might enjoy. Bye-bye.